Uh, Lincoln's election. I told you earlier, I told you last week, and also earlier today. 6 states left the Union, 5 states left the Union with South Carolina. Lincoln gets elected on November 7th. Lincoln gets elected on November 7th with the electoral vote. South Carolina leaves the Union December 27th, around Christmas. Mississippi leaves the Union January 9th. Florida leaves the Union January 10th. Alabama leaves the Union, I'm saying it doesn't leave the Union. Alabama says it wants to leave the Union January 11th. Louisiana, a week later, a day later. Everything's stack of cards. Georgia, January 20th. Georgia was the one. These 5 states, Louisiana, Georgia, Alabama, 6 states. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 states join South Carolina. 6 states. Texas said, we want to leave the Union. 2. And we don't care what Lincoln does or doesn't do. We're going to leave but we leave it up. The only state of all these 17 states, the only state that said, let the people of Texas decide whether. And we're going to hold a vote on February 1. We're going to meet on February 1, and we're going to hold a vote on February 23. February 23, by the people. The people will decide on February 23. We will hold a vote. We'll probably leave the Union on February 1. We'll have a convention. We'll probably leave the Union on February 1. But we'll wait till February 23 to decide whether or not we leave the Union. Let the people of Texas decide. That was the only state. Now these other states, they're congressmen, they're senators, they're representatives. They're split down the middle. I didn't split them, these 6 states leave the Union. These other 8 states, North Carolina, Delaware, Maryland, these are the slave states. North Carolina, Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, Missouri, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Virginia. 8 states say it's not enough for Lincoln to be elected that we're going to leave the Union. He's got to do something else, plus, baby. In other words, the vote of the people is not enough. The vote of the people to make Lincoln president is not enough to leave the Union. These others said we're leaving the Union. They left the Union, and they said we're going to meet, not Texas, because Texas had to wait till February 23, but these other states, Louisiana, Georgia, Alabama, Florida, Mississippi, and South Carolina. Those 6 states said we have to move fast. We have to move fast to we're out of the Union. They're not out of the Union, but we say we're out of the Union, and we have to have a constitutional convention. And I talked about this last week. And what did I say about that constitutional convention? I said they made it secret. Their doors were closed. They wanted it to appear like there was no dissension, no conflict. And they put a state constitution in effect. And why did they say they got to act fast? Because this was February 4. They met February 4th. They met in Montgomery, Alabama. These 6 states. I said, we got to move fast and quietly and close doors. And they had delegates from their conventions meet in Montgomery. Now, South Carolina left the Union. It said they had left the Union in December. Now the others, but these states said to South Carolina, wait for us to join you. Don't attack Fort Sumter right now, because we want to be united. We don't want you to be South Carolina. We're leaving the Union with you. So let us, South Carolina, don't invade Fort Sumter. Hold off. Get stronger around Fort Sumter. We will give up Fort Sumter, but let it be united, 6 states, united confederacy of these 6 states. Yes.
Did it have anything to do with they wanted to do whatever they did before Lincoln?
That's what I'm trying to say.
Before Lincoln took office.
When was Lincoln going to become president?
March.
4th. They wanted to tell Lincoln and Buchanan, we don't have time to give it to the people. because we want to appear united. Because Lincoln's coming in on March 4. That is why we have to move quick. Very good, Mike. That was what I was trying to say. They were trying to get it. You strong point of 6 states, actually 7 states. No, Texas was still up. These 5 states plus South Carolina to tell Lincoln it's a done deal. It's not just South Carolina. It's these 5 other states. Got it? Does anybody understand?
Yeah, what-
Michael, I can't.
Okay. Was it also because Buchanan was known as a weak president at the time?
Michael,
Yeah.
he has
I'm
a
sorry.
turn.
Okay, I'm
No,
sorry.
I had told you last week and the weeks before that Buchanan started to get tough because his cabinet started to leave. If they really felt, I'll say this, if Buchanan was so weak, they would have been able to have left the Union. Buchanan said they're not out of the Union. I'm not enforcing any laws, but they're not out of the Union. And you gotta remember, I said that a couple of weeks ago, basically in 1860, the only laws that could be enforced were the import laws. There was no income tax. And maybe the mail wasn't sent to these states, but they really were only, it was one symbol, the forts that were in the Deep South. Now, this is funny. Remember I told you that they fired at the Star of the West on January 7th? Remember I told you that? The Citadel? In Wilmington, North Carolina. Remember, North Carolina is one of these states where the governor of North Carolina says, wait, don't leave the Union so fast. Remember I told you these other, North Carolina had a governor named John Ellis, E-L-L-I-S. And he believed, although he may not have believed in democracy, he didn't believe in mob rule either. And a mob descended on Fort Caswell in Wilmington, North Carolina, descended on Fort Caswell and Fort Johnson, American forts in Wilmington, North Carolina. They were run, the people in charge were 2 sergeants. That's how strong it was. They had 2 sergeants. Sergeant Dardinkiller in Johnston and Riley, John Riley in Fort Caswell, in charge of these forts. And about maybe 50, 60 more people captured both these forts. And they said, we're doing this for North Carolina. John Ellis. They surrendered the forts. The Dardinkiller and Caswell surrendered the forts. And they said, but will you give us a receipt to the mob? And the mob gave them a receipt of the goods that were there. Ellis and the people of North Carolina said, we don't belong out of this union. Return the forts to the United States. And believe it or not, John Ellis and the North Carolinian people called back Dardinkiller and Caswell and reinstated the U.S. control over these forts. So there wasn't in these states a movement to get out of the Union. They said Lincoln's election is not enough. When you think of South Carolina or North Carolina then, they were so different than in their thinking. North Carolinians wanted to basically stay in the Union. But they wanted a weak president. They wanted a weak Lincoln. They basically said, that's not enough. And the same thing happened. All these states, Virginia, Tennessee, Arkansas, Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, Delaware, North Carolina, and Delaware, yeah, all these states basically said it's not enough. Not enough to leave the Union. Now, I told you before, Virginia didn't even vote for Breckinridge in the election of 1860. They voted for a man, Bell. What did Bell stand for? Bell stood for whatever happens, we must preserve the Union. If Robert E. Lee came from Virginia, listen to the people of Virginia. The people of Virginia supported John Bell's idea that we should not leave the Union. Robert E. Lee was torn, but he said, my state, I can't tell you whether or not they're going to leave the Union, but they voted. They voted against Breckinridge, the Southerner, and they voted for a man that said we should stay in the Union. So if Robert E. Lee was thinking of leaving the Union, he should be thinking of what the people did in the election of 1860, because that was the only vote in 1860 that the people of Virginia could decide. And they didn't vote for Breckinridge. Yet when Robert E. Lee comes, and we will talk about this, when Robert E. Lee comes south, comes, and he's given the opportunity of becoming the head of the army of the North, he turns it down because the governor of Virginia now says, John Letcher, we're going to leave the Union. That was in April. And Robert E. Lee said, I follow my governor. I may not follow my people, but I follow my governor. But again, that was the difference between November, when Virginia voted, and March, when Lincoln, right after Lincoln became president, when he offered Lee the opportunity to become head of the Union Army. Now, I wanted to tell you, I told you last week, I gotta pace myself, I got 2 hours here, so forgive me if I pause. I wanted to tell you about Abe Lincoln. I told you, what did I tell you last week about Abe Lincoln? The guy said what was on his mind. He was not, I was called Honest Abe. It was part of his temperament. How many people weren't here last week? All right. I just want, nothing wrong, I just want to repeat, I may repeat some of my stuff partly. Honest Abe was not a politician that would ever get elected today, in my opinion. Ever, because he always said it like it was. Honest Abe was Honest Abe because he couldn't double talk. And here he is. And maybe if he had double talked, he might have saved the Union. He might have saved the Union. Because people were looking for a leader to save the Union. But he couldn't double talk. Couldn't double talk. And when he is, and he says, I owe it to the people. I owe it to the people. But he was a very humble man. He said it. With all due honesty, I'm a very humble man. But I have the most powerful responsibility that no other president ever has assumed. But he says, I will, with God's grace, because he believed very deeply in God, with God's grace, I will be able to make it. Without God's grace, I won't be able to make it. That's how he thought. And he said that over and over again to himself. With God's grace, I'll be able to make it. Is God on my side? And this is what he says. He's just been elected president. People are looking for a leader. People are looking for a leader. And what does he say? What does he say? I told you, if there had been a vote right after he had gotten elected, the people who had voted for Lincoln would have been out. If it was just a referendum, not 4 people running where he doesn't get the majority vote. If a referendum had been conducted right after these 6 states left the Union, if there had been a referendum in America, including the South and the North, I don't include the South, and said, should we give in to the South and let them, and not extend slavery into the territories? Because that was what the election was about. It wasn't about slavery in 1860. It was, should we extend slavery into the territories? I don't guarantee you, but I am pretty sure, since he didn't get the majority vote anyway, when that was enough, he would have gotten the majority vote. The majority vote would have been to Lincoln, give up your principles. Give up your principles. Let them have their way. We need a union. We got to keep the union together. We got to keep the union together. Don't break up the union over an issue involving the extension of slavery. Because Lincoln said after he got elected, I will not change my position. Hell or high water, I will not change my position. I do not believe in the extension of slavery, and there was no referendum. Buchanan was weak, and didn't say, which he could have done extra constitutionally, he could have, Buchanan, he was still the president, he could have said, let's take it to a vote to the American people. It never been done before, but there was no reason why they couldn't have done it. And if the people of the country had said, stay in the Union, we need them in the Union, forget about extension of slavery, there would have been no Civil War. Buchanan didn't do that. He laid back. He didn't think he had the authority to have a referendum. Remember, there was no belief in majority rule, either in the North or the South. People didn't go to the populace. They were the Constitution of the United States designed against democracy. The Constitution of the United States is designed against democracy when it was originally built. The President of the United States was never elected by the people. It was elected by an oligopoly. Few people. The people in the Constitution did not trust the people. Your Constitution was not built on the belief that the people could govern. And it was still going on that way in 1860. Although Andrew Jackson was the one man that said the people should decide, but he was gone. Now, this is what Lincoln says. This is what Lincoln says. Am I too loud? Am I okay?
What did he say?
Lincoln. This is weird. Here he is. He's got February 11th, February 10th, February 13th. Lincoln, Davis, Lee. February 10th, Davis. February 11th, Lincoln. February 13th, Lee. They're all going east on a train. Same. On February 13th, they're all on a train going east. Not together, different destinations. All for the same purpose, though. To see what they're going to do with their future. Now, Lincoln's been elected president, and he's leaving Springfield. He's leaving Springfield on February 10th. He had sold his house, and he was in a rented place. And he gets up early in the morning at 6 o'clock in Springfield, and he makes a beautiful speech, a heartfelt speech. And in it, he says, I'm leaving the town where I was brought up, where I was a young man, to be an old man. I've been here all these years. I'm leaving for Washington. They've elected me president of the United States. I don't know what the future will bring. I may never come back. But I want you to know, with God's help, I will make it. And with your support, and God's support, I will make it. And he goes on a trip east. And he makes that's a beautiful farewell speech in Springfield. Now he gets on the train. Remember, I told you, he didn't believe there was going to be a war. Even though all these states have left the Union, he didn't believe it. He had a low opinion of that these people would not. They were pulling a bluff. Pulling a bluff. That the South would never leave the Union. He was an optimist in that sense. He was a pessimist in his whole life, but in that sense he was an optimist. He said, I will take it when it comes. And this is what he says. I wanted to get it, and I don't know if I can get it. Let's see if I can get it. This is what he says. Everybody's waiting for him to say something. Save the Union. This is what he gets into. Now, he made a beautiful speech when he left, but he's got no ability to tell the people anything of importance because he doesn't know. He hasn't been there yet. And he tells the people who are all now in who are all waiting to hear with bated breath. And he gets into Lawrenceburg, Indiana. He's going to Washington. But he's going a long way around. He's going into New York. He's going into Philadelphia. He's not going directly to Washington. He's going from Springfield, Illinois, and he's taking trips, and he's doing what they call introducing himself to the American people on a railway stop. And he gets into Lawrenceburg, Indiana, and thousands of people are waiting for him. And this is what he says. This is hysterical to me. Mr. President, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? This is what he says. And tell me this is a man who gets your confidence up, who's leading the people.
Nothing's true.
I have been, remember I told you he's a humble man. I have been selected. This is what he's saying to the whole populace. What are you going to say, Mr. Lee? I have been selected to fill an important office for a brief period. A brief period. And am now, in your eye, invested with an influence which will soon pass away. I'm only here for a short time, it's going to go away from me. But should my administration prove to be a very wicked one, or what is more probable, a very foolish one, he's telling everybody my administration is going to be terrible. This is what he's thinking. He says what he thinks. If you, the people, are but true to yourselves, and in the Constitution, there is little that I can really do. Thank God. Can you imagine a speech like that? Today? Can you imagine taking the reins of power and saying to the populace that is all waiting to see if you're going to leave the Union, I'm probably going to screw it all up. But don't worry, I'm only here for 4 years. You can't get anybody that, if they would impeach him right then and there. That was Lincoln. He was saying it what he believed. He couldn't do it, he says, but maybe I can. But I'm trying, but I won't be, I may be a wicked one, but I'm more likely a foolish one. Not more likely that I'll be foolish than not foolish, more likely I'll be foolish than anything else. That is the President of the United States talking. The people that are looking for him.
Yeah, but Jerry, he went from that 3 years later to the Gettysburg Address,
Oh, listen,
which is
what I am trying,
quite a trip.
you think I'm denigrating
Oh,
him?
no, I know
You think by what I'm saying, I am saying to you,
he was
he is a man, honest Abe. And the thing about Abe is that he grows. He grows. He's a man who feels for the people, the pulse of the people. And he eventually issues a belief in the rights of man. And the reason why Lincoln is the most talked about man other than Jesus Christ is how he grows into it from a tragedy. Here's a man who's just I think he just started sporting a beard. You look at his pictures when he's shot, and you look at him in 1860 when he's first announced as president. It's night and day. He grows. He suffers. And one thing he does, he never, although he was talking this way, he never once in the 4 years or 5 years that he fought this war said we should give up the war. He was never a man that, on principles, gave up on anything that he really believed in. He, as I said before, he was a man who overcame. It's amazing that he didn't have a breakdown because he suffered so much. He felt the stings of a whip quicker than almost anybody around him for other people.
And it was his birthday.
What?
It was his birthday.
That was his birthday. And that's maybe what he said, because he thought, look what I've accomplished. I've become president of the United States, but this union is overwhelming. Now he's going on February 12th, he says that speech. February 11th, he goes into other places. Sometimes he makes an eloquent speech. Remember, he wrote the Madison Gettysburg Address. He wrote that. He was a brilliant man. He could be very eloquent, but you can't be brilliant every minute of the day. And he was thinking what he was saying. He was saying what he was thinking. Excuse me. He was saying what he was thinking. So when he had to go to these obligatory stops, he said what he thought was on his mind. But the people didn't care that he said that. They still believed in him. But not the people of the South, and not the people of the North who had influence. That's why Lincoln was considered a monkey. If you ever see the pictures, because the Southern people got these speeches on his way to Washington, which said, I'm going to probably screw it up, and this and that. And they said, we got a country bumpkin who doesn't know what he's doing. And Seward and these people that he had picked to his cabinet said, we have to run the cabinet, because this guy's a country bumpkin. Because Lincoln was not like Jackson and Reagan. He was not a magnetic personality. He was humble. He would hold the horse's reins while somebody tied his shoes. Very few presidents would do that. He was one of them. He was a very humble man in those days. Okay. Now, Jefferson Davis, elected president of the Confederacy, of these 6 states, February 8th. He gets the word, February 9th, you've been elected president, come to Montgomery. He gives Wednesday's notice, he gets on a train. He's of the 3 men, Lincoln, Davis, Lee. Of the 3 men, Davis knew it was probably going to be a terrible war. Not Lincoln, he was an optimist. Not Lee, he was an optimist. Davis thought, I am going to have blood shed, but I'm going to expect that. I've accepted the office of president of these 6 states to leave the Union and join together to fire on Fort Sumter instead of having just South Carolina do it, or whatever. We are leaving the Union, and maybe Buchanan or Lincoln will accept it, but more likely than not, knowing Lincoln, who says, I will not give in, and Lincoln also saying that if Buchanan had given up the states, he would bring them back, more likely than not, there's going to be a bloody war, because he knew that he could lead the South, because the Southern people, the populace, the poor people, would support him. And he thought there would be a bloody war. And he was pretty shaken up by it, but he said, Lincoln and Davis walked around, both of them were just elected president of their respective countries, if you want to call it, or regions, and each of them walked around with a sourpuss in their head. That, why am I taking this responsibility? Davis felt he had an obligation, but he knew that there would probably be a war. Because he knew the Southern mentality, whereas Lincoln did not. Lincoln believed there would not be a war. But Davis believed there would be a war. And he gets into Montgomery. He gets in on February 14th. And he gets off. And remember I told you who started this whole thing? The whole war, maybe? William Landis Yancey? Because he was able to organize everybody. He meets him. He meets Davis in Montgomery. Montgomery's haggard. He gets up in front of the crowd, and everybody there is screaming. And William Landis Yancey is not remembered for maybe starting the Civil War with his organization. He's the man behind the scenes all the time. He's noted for this one statement. He introduces Davis. And what does he say? To the people, that goes down into history as one of the most famous statements of all time among American history. The man and the hour have met. The man and the hour have met. That was William Landis Yancey introducing Davis. You look at the quotation books, you will see the man and the hour have met has been quoted over and over again. He was addressing Jefferson Davis. And Davis assumes the responsibility and says, I expect a war on our hands. People will die, but we are going to continue because we are in the right. His speech, Davis's speech is not that great. It's Yanis's speech that says the man in the hour of men. But Davis makes that statement that we're going to join forces. Okay. By the way, there wasn't much of a place in Montgomery, Alabama for Davis to be. The capital of Montgomery, the state capital of Alabama, was not very big. And eventually he had private residences, and we won't talk about that now, it's not important. But what is important is now we're talking on Robert E. Lee. I may try to finish at 11:45. You people say that you want to leave at 11:45? All right. Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee. What was he doing on February 10th? He was in Texas. He was head of the 2nd Cavalry. He was stationed at Fort Mason, Texas. He's in the United States Army. He had fought in the Mexican War brilliantly. Winfield Scott was the head of the Army in the North and the South. He was the head of he was a 3-star general, the highest general in the country. While Buchanan is still president, remember, Buchanan stiffened up now. Winfield Scott says, we may have a war. I need a man. I'm too old. I'm 70 years old. I'm 250 pounds. I can't get up on a horse anymore. I'm more on a rocking chair. I need a man to lead this country. It can't be me. And he goes to Buchanan. He says to Buchanan, we need a leader, a military leader. I have the man who I knew in the Mexican War. His name is a lieutenant colonel from Fort Mason, Texas. His name is Robert E. Lee. He's from Virginia, but I believe he'll serve the Army. Let him, and a telegram is sent to David Twiggs. David Twiggs is the general, brigadier general, the 1-star general in Texas. He's in charge of Texas. He's got 2,400 men in Texas. What are they doing in Texas? They're fighting the Indians, right? They're scattered all over Texas. Their one location, the center town, is Fort Mason, which is not in a town. It's right near San Antonio. It's right near San Antonio, which is it was Texas. San Antonio was probably the biggest city at that time, right? 2 months earlier, Twiggs went on a leave. He's the general of Texas. He was sick. He's another 69-year-old man. I told you Winfield Scott 70, Twiggs is 70, Buchanan 70. They're all antiquated. Twiggs had fought brilliantly in the Mexican War, but his time had come. He was a supporter of the South. Twiggs was from Georgia, I think, and he addresses. First of all, he addresses the President of the United States and says, relieve me of command. I can't fight for the United States. And in Texas, the people of Texas are probably going to leave the Union. Probably leave the Union. I don't think I should be in a position to lead a country when I don't believe in if I believe that we should lead, that the South is right, I shouldn't lead the people of Texas. I should be relieved of my command. Here's a man who served for 40 years. He sends an address out, January 25th. Relieve me. 2 weeks before that, Twiggs was sick, and he left Texas. Who did he put in charge of Texas? Robert E. Lee. Can you imagine if Robert E. Lee, if Twiggs didn't come back, he was so sick, Robert E. Lee would have been in Texas. I think he might have stayed in the Union. But Twiggs came back. Because Virginia at that time was in the Union. Twiggs comes back, relieves, says, thank you, Mr. Lee, Lieutenant Colonel Lee. You're now back to being Lieutenant Colonel. Okay? But Twiggs asked to be relieved. But what does he do? He doesn't send a telegram. He sends it by letter. So it takes time. And the people in Buchanan's administration are very slow to respond. They get the letter. And around February 10th, they relieve him of command. Around just about this time. Remember, there's going to be an election on February 23rd in Texas. Remember I talked about that? A referendum on whether they should leave the Union. Texas, by the way, on February 1 had agreed to leave the Union. But it was up to the people of Texas to see if they would leave the Union. It was the one state that had a referendum. By the way, Texas had voted for, in the election, in 1860, 3 months before, had voted for Breckinridge. They had not supported Bell like Virginia did. So it was anticipated that Texas would leave the Union because their vote in November 1860 had said that it would vote for Breckinridge. Finally, the people, a mob comes along and they organize. But this is an organized mob. A man by the name of McCullough, famous man comes later, Ben McCullough, has 1,000 men recruited Texas Rangers. He recruits these Texas Rangers and he gets them into San Antonio on February 15th. Now, Lee had been given a command to leave Texas to go to see Winfield Scott in Washington on around February 13th. Remember I put it down, February 13th? February 13th, Lee is relieved of his duties in Texas to report to Washington to become head of the army. But he's reported, this is crazy, he's relieved of duty. He has no service in Texas on February 13th. He's now basically a person in those days that was given a travel pass to get out of San Antonio, Fort Mason, go to San Antonio, take a horseback to the port of Texas, and then travel to Washington. He gets in. The color is now organized 1,000 men at the same time, has organized 1,000 Texas Rangers to descend. Meanwhile, to descend on San Antonio, just as Robert E. Lee gets into town. Robert E. Lee walks into town, I think on February 14th. He'd been traveling on February 13th. On February 14th, he gets into San Antonio. Basically, he's a civilian. He doesn't have his army clothes on. He's got him in a valise. And he goes to he goes to a woman who is a pro-union person because her husband was a friend of his and was not in town. And he says to her, "What's going on?" She says, "It looks like McCullough is coming in and we don't have anybody in Texas to go. Twiggs is giving up Texas. He hasn't received word yet. He has to be relieved. He hadn't yet been relieved. He was relieved the next day. Remember I told you he didn't send the telegram? They returned it by letter too. You're relieved. But on February 14th, if I get it, I don't know the exact date. It comes to the 15th or 14th. I can't get it exact. But on the same day, that McCullough's rampaging through town with his 1,000 men, saying we're supporting the South. We're going to take over Fort Mason and all the other forts of Texas. Lee comes into town. And he stays at a hotel. He gets up the next morning. McCullough's taken over the town. Twiggs has given up Twiggs, the general, has given up Texas. I told you. He asked to be relieved. He wasn't relieved. When McCullough came into town, he gave it to McCullough. Now, Robert E. Lee, at that moment, Robert E. Lee is on his way to get to a ship to Galveston, I think it is, to get up north. And he reports to McCullough's men. And there was a talk right then and there where they should arrest him. Robert E. Lee could have been arrested by McCullough's men because he was in the United States Army. But he said, I'm not in the Army. I'm on my way to Washington. You can't arrest me. And they said, you're right. We'll let you go. Had he been arrested by McCullough, maybe Robert E. Lee would have served in the Union Army. He would have been a prisoner of war. We don't know how long he would have been a prisoner of war. He got out. So here he is. He gets on a ship, and he gets into, and then he starts to read while he's on ship. He's a free man. That his state, although it hasn't left the Union, is sympathetic to the South. So he turns back. He's hesitating which way to go. He doesn't know which way to go. And he eventually, even when he was given the opportunity of becoming head of the army, he thought maybe he should. He goes down, and Winfield Scott offers him the head of being head of the United States Army in case there's a war. And he hesitates about it so much that I really do believe that had he been arrested in Texas on February 14th, he probably would have gone over to the Union side. And maybe this war wouldn't have lasted 5 years, because Robert E. Lee, as you take my lectures on the Civil War, Robert E. Lee extended this war for a year or two longer than it would have been because of his brilliant generalship. But in things like that could make a difference. So here we are. You have Lee. Oh, so now, what does Buchanan say? Twiggs, you're relieved. He puts Carlos Waite, who's a colonel, in charge. Because, remember, Lee was a lieutenant colonel. Carlos Waite was a full colonel. He puts Carlos Waite in charge. And Carlos Waite does not want to give up Texas. But now Twiggs has already given it up. So a day later, Carlos Waite, Twiggs is relieved. Carlos Waite comes in and he says it's a done deal. Twiggs has given up Texas. By the way, funny thing happened. Buchanan is so strong now, he suddenly is leaving the administration. He charges Twiggs with treachery. And Twiggs, a 70-year-old man, gets an accusation from the president that he's charging him with treachery. So what does Twiggs write back? I've been a general for 40 years. I've never been accused of treachery before. Mr. Buchanan, when you are no longer president, we're going to have a duel. And these 70-year-old men planning to have a duel over whether Twiggs should be declared. Okay, my friend is giving me the sign that we're about to leave. So, you wanted to leave a quarter till, okay? Any questions? Okay. One more session. Okay?
One more
I
session
wanted
to
it
go.
longer, but the weather stopped me.
So next week is the last week?
Last week here, yeah,
It's-
last week on this class.
And a quarter two, right?
Everybody want a quarter two?
Yeah.
In fact, you could start earlier.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can start at 10:30 if you want,
No.
if you have to finish it up.
It's gotta get here.